Welcome to the Esports Performance Summit. My name is Brian Bain, and today we have Andrew Kinch from GameAware with us. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Andrew, at GameAware, you guys are doing lots of great things in terms of helping gamers be healthier gamers, and really addressing and identifying any kind of problematic gaming habits and things like that that actually impede performance. And we've talked a little bit before this interview about there's so many gamers out there, whether you're professional or non-professional, and honestly, regardless of age even, that are really love gaming, want to become even more competitive gamers, but you can easily slide into really a lot of unhealthy stuff. And I'm just going to kind of toss it over to you and you kind of pick up there and talk about what are some of the things you're seeing in terms of identifying here are some signs of unhealthy gaming, and talk through what some stuff you guys do at GameAware to help gamers game healthier and perform better. So,
all right. I guess just a little bit of a background. So I've been gaming most of my life, but I've also got a background in education, in well-being as a coordinator at a school for well-being, and I got the parent hat as well on, and I've been trying to put together a balanced view, because right now this debate around video games and just in general, and the World Health Organization recognizing gaming disorder, it's very polarized. It's not very balanced. Usually the gaming side doesn't understand the academic and well-being side of things, and then the fear-mongering side has never even picked up a game before. So I'm kind of like riding that line and trying to help people find that sweet spot. I guess that's the main thing for me. And I guess that sweet spot for casuals, for people who, or not just casuals, but people who want to be competitive and play well and enjoy their games, but that's not their job. And then I guess the crossover here that's really interesting to me is where does all this fit when we start talking about esports?
Right.
Yeah. So I guess, what do? I work with families primarily, and most of the time what I end up dealing with is kids who are playing too much, that they're not in balance, they're not getting a lot of they're getting into a lot of fights, I guess, with their parents. It's pretty common. Sometimes that's just because the parents don't know what's going on, and I need to educate the parents, and sometimes both sides don't know what's going on. And what we try to do is understand, and there's no pun intended, the GameAware is about awareness. Like, you're supposed to know what's going on in your brain, what's going on in the game, and motivation. Like, why do you really love this game? If I can just flip over to my my Prezi for a sec.
Sure.
I do have a few slides on that I'd like to show you. So I'll just skip through a little bit about this. And so, so like I said, I'm really interested in understanding motivation, how it applies to gaming and real life. And there's a particular theory I'll mention in a second, making room for life. And I guess one of the taglines for me is, I think gaming should be a hobby and not a habit. Is there a safe pathway to becoming a pro for esports? And I think that's a really interesting topic for us to talk about today, because there's lots of talk about what actually happens when you are a pro and keeping things in balance, and the physical health and mental health stuff that comes with that, and the burnout. But what about the people who aren't pros yet? They're not getting paid to train, and some conversations I've had say you need to train just as much as a pro to be able to be good enough to break in, right? So it's pretty interesting. Intelligent gaming, at least for the rest of us, quality gaming is not just for enjoyment, but I think for performance, more useful than just grinding all the time, even though that is the current sort of pathway. And I'm interested in how people and gamers can optimize that gaming experience and their performance without overdoing it. And that may look a little bit different for a lot of people, but is it worth going through some of these stats for you? Because I think these stats are actually quite similar.
Yeah, let's get a glimpse of them just for a minute, because I think it's helpful for gamers to understand what the landscape looks like and where they may fit into it.
Yeah, I agree. I give this presentation, different versions of presentations to, like I said, professionals and parents and gamers, and everyone seems to like to know what's going on with this. So in Australia anyway, and I have briefly looked at North American stats before, and things are actually quite similar. But, some people are surprised that 34 is the average age. I'm not surprised because, I'm 40 now, but the vast majority of gamers are over 18, right? And the kind of programs that I work with, it's parents worried about their teenagers because they don't want it to become a problem, right? 2/3 of Australians play, but that also includes like grandma playing Candy Crush. It's not just people playing Call of Duty,
Yeah, a little bit of a difference, yeah.
Yeah, but again, still fits into the metric, I guess. Pretty much every home with kids has games. And then the average for males and females is up there for you. So like 98 minutes for males, 77 minutes for females. But the main thing is that 15 to 24-year-old age bracket, which again, if we're talking about esports, this is important. And it's roughly 18 hours a week at 2.5 hours a day or more than that. So is that too much? Well, it's interesting because there's a study that I always like to look at that talks about the benefit of playing video games. It's this Oxford study by Dr. Andrew Shabilsky. And he talks about psychosocial adjustment. So kind of like, at what point are we going to see diminishing returns? At least this is the way I interpret the study. And you get a benefit from playing when you're playing up to an hour a day. And it doesn't necessarily drop off too much. You're still doing all right when you play to 2 hours, maybe even up to 3 hours. But past 3 hours, if it's every day, past 3 hours is when you start to see a detrimental effect on well-being, which is a curious thing because lots of players play longer than that, right? But I think as we go through, it's not actually this big mystery because, if you're playing 4 hours, are you going to play, especially if you're playing a competitive game, are you going to play without any frustration?
Right.
Are you going to be at your peak performance the entire time?
Right.
I would say no.
Right.
And everybody who's been through my program agrees, yeah, there's this point where it kind of drops off.
What do you think of any kind of traditional sports or, any kind of profession, is you only have so many hours of peak performance a day, regardless if you're sitting at a desk or you're practicing somewhere physically or doing a video gaming. So that makes sense.
It's interesting. I mean, it may not be a perfect analogy, but for me, in beach volleyball, where I played quite competitively and trained really, really hard, it's a good sport because it's like soft on your knees, but it's tough because you get out of balance quite easily and you got to do lots of rehab. And so I always looked at it like when I played, I trained hard or played a tournament, I'm spending sort of cash and I got to earn that cash back again by doing my rehab so that I'm flush again. Because if I don't, then I'm just going to go down the mine and get injured and not be able to perform.
Well, and that's why I'm excited about what you guys are doing at GameAware because I think, again, so many gamers think the more practice, the better I get. The more I practice, the better I get, but not realizing that balance you're describing and what you can be doing. How you can practice smarter and also what other things you can be doing life-wise to help your gaming actually be upgraded.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm not an expert on this topic here, but the whole 10,000 hours thing, that thing about you need 10,000 hours to master a skill, right? There's also research to say after the fact when they're reviewing that kind of stuff, and I forget where I heard this now, but really the real learning comes from the transference of skills from different things. So they're finding now you're going to do better in hockey if you don't just play hockey from birth until trying to get into the pros. You need to play some soccer, you need to play some basketball and get all these different movement patterns that are like integrated into your body so that you can move more efficiently. So it's the variety is not just the spice of life here. The variety helps you perform. And so, having different genres of games is one thing, but like having a variety of different experiences in your life are actually really important as well. So, there's probably a lot of competitive gamers out there, they don't necessarily want to be pros, but they played basketball and soccer and they did all these other things. And this is just another outlet to meet that competitive need. And it's actually a good little segue. If we're going to talk about needs, this is kind of the core of everything that I sort of structured GameAware around is understanding your own motivation. So know thyself, right? And so self-determination theory is something that I've worked with quite a bit. I think it's Edward Deci. It's Deci and Ryan are the two guys that have sort of come up with it, and Scott Rigby's done some work with that as well. And it's kind of like three overarching buckets that we try to meet or fulfill in our lives psychologically, and it has to do with motivation. And one of them is competence. And so that idea that we want to feel like we're getting good at something, in video games, it might be achievements and rankings, or like if you get a headshot, you get that little different feedback. You might get that little clink sound for hitting a helmet, or a little extra blood, or whatever the case is. And that's more about, it's not about gore. It's about recognizing that you've performed that skill well. And so we like to feel competent. It's not just in games. Anytime you played a sport, most adults just get it through work. You know, these are the types of ways that we feel competent in our lives. And autonomy is a little different. And so that's like that freedom of choice. So having control over your decisions in your life, right? And teenagers don't get a lot of that anyway. Like you can't drink, you can't vote, you can't do these things.
Right.
And they're also learning to become more independent. So that's where all that just general teenage rebellion and stuff is, you know, people are at odds with their parents. And so autonomy is another really important thing. And with relatedness, that's just mattering to others and social connection and being part of a community. And, you know, the gamer community is enormous, but it could be the community of a LAN or an internet cafe where lots of locals get to know each other, or playing on a team in esports, right? One of the other reasons why people play, though, if I can just go a little more serious for a second, is escape. And so and there's lots more to talk about, but I'll try to keep it simple today. But escape, you know, at our core, we do seek out pleasure and avoid pain. And so if your pain is boredom, that's one reason, but it could be anxiety and depression. It could be, you know, a tough upbringing. It could be whatever. And so games are an easy way to go and feel good when real life is hard. And that's probably the most dangerous of all the motivators. I reckon if you've got some, if you got escapism happening, that's the most unhealthy motivator, you know, whereas the other ones are you're trying to fulfill those needs that we all try to fulfill in our lives. And with video games, they don't do a good enough job of doing it by themselves. And because they take up so much time, there's a bit of an opportunity cost there, right? Where you give up the opportunity to do other things that'll get to meet your needs better. So the way I look at video games is, you know, I want to feel competent. That's my main reason why I want to play. I want to get, you know, pixel perfect gameplay. It's hard to do, but that's my driver. And it's, for me, it's, you know, real life does that better. But the problem is that games will let you do it really easily. Like you don't even have to roll a bed. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's that path of least resistance. It's instant gratification. And then sometimes it starts to take over, right? So the real value proposition of playing video games, when I ask people, they say because they're fun, but it's really about need satisfaction. Because I'll tell you, certain games hit these things a bit differently. So any competitive or esports type game is probably around competence and a bit of relatedness, being on a team and stuff like that. But then you get a totally different kind of game like The Witcher or Grand Theft Auto, right? And that game's all about choice. It's about, I can choose to do this or choose to do that. I have freedom over the way I'm going to direct my dude in this open world. And the complete opposite of that is Guitar Hero. You know, it's a linear game, right? So that's not going to meet autonomy needs at all. So depending on where in somebody's life, how well they're hitting those needs, you know, they might play particular games to try and hit those needs if they're not meeting them in real life. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm curious how you help. How do you encourage gamers to help discern some of this? Because obviously, when you get into some deeper identity need, really deep needs, stuff like this, can be really, that's some self
reflection.
Yeah, self-reflection that a lot of people have never done before, and when they start doing it, it's kind of like I don't know what you're talking about, man. So there's a couple things I want to key in on that you talked about. One, I'd love to hear more about how you help gamers do that. And earlier, and just as a side note, you mentioned earlier something about a pathway to becoming pro and like a healthy way of doing that. I want to come back around to that in a minute, but I'd love for you to key in more on this self-determination theory and the self-reflection stuff. I think that's really important.
Sure. The self-reflection stuff, I mean, honestly, I used to run a philosophy group in my school voluntarily because I loved it, right? And all the well-being stuff included a lot of counseling and learning about psychology, even if I'm not a psychologist. And Like it's all second nature to me. I can run a group. I can make them think about their own thinking. So what do we call it? Metacognition, right? And that's the whole point of GameAware. Like you need to know why you're doing all this stuff. If you know your motivations, you can make better decisions because then you can start to recognize things as they happen in your head, right? And really, a lot of what my program is a resilience program. It's just aimed at gamers because I understand them because I am one. Whereas most people don't, right? Especially people in well-being. They're like, okay, yeah, I want to help you with your anxiety and depression, but you're playing this game and I don't know anything about it. And then there's no connection.
Right.
Like, the gamer does not connect at all.
Right.
So I guess in group work, I teach them what I'm teaching you right now. They can be 12 years old and I've got different ways of explaining it so they understand as best as they can. And then they start to identify which of these three, or even four, if you want to put it that way, because I do mention that, but to rank them. So what's the most important for them? And honestly, the first thing I do in the program is I ask them what games they play. Top three games, how many hours, questions like that. And in my head, I'm already making a ranking list for each of them.
Right.
So if someone's playing, like I said, if someone's playing Grand Theft Auto, I'm like, yeah, okay, autonomy probably is first. Different people, it's not always true though, because like you and I could both play CS:GO for totally different reasons.
Right. Right.
You might just play with your buddies and because maybe you moved away and they live in a different town or city, and that's how you connect. Whereas I want to win.
Well, and I guess one of the things is that's a really great observation as far as what games are being played and kind of what the nature of those games are. But then also, I guess while playing and when you finish playing, asking the question, what did you enjoy about that? And then think, well, why did I enjoy that? And then the better you understand the definitions for competence, autonomy, relatedness, and perhaps even escape, then you realize, oh, I really enjoyed that because, fill in the blank, like I really enjoyed getting that perfect shot and people congratulating me. And it's like, oh, well, maybe I truly, that relatedness is really the most important thing for me. Or the competence part, or maybe even a blending of those. Is that kind of...
That's part of it for sure. The other side is when we get into the actual brain, and I mean, again, not a neuroscientist over here, but I can read, and I've been working this for a while, and like understanding dopamine being, and we can get into it a bit more later, but understanding like when are you getting your rewards and when are you not, and how does that make you feel? And one of the most important things that I like to talk about, I guess, is that you kind of build up a tolerance, and then you need to play more to feel the same amount of reward. And that affects all sorts of different things. And we'll get into that in a sec.
Okay.
What else? Actually, we'll get into that right now. So,
yes,
it's a neurotransmitter. Good timing. So, look, it's about motivation. People think it's about pleasure and reward. It totally is. But I really think it's about desire, right? So you're supposed to have the dopamine response is really about setting healthy habits. So like if you couldn't enjoy food at all, then people would be less likely to have healthy bodies and have enough nutrition. Like if it felt like you're eating a piece of poo the whole time, it'd be very difficult to be healthy, right? So certain things release dopamine in the brain, sex does the same thing, so we can have a human race. And then, there's natural things out there that give you that, and accomplishment and things like that. Video games are unnatural in the way that they provide you so much dopamine, and that's what makes them fun. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does mean that because it's not natural, your brain adapts differently, and it might not be to your benefit if it's done too much.
And let me ask you a question about that. You said video games are unnatural and that they provide so much dopamine. And I guess that comes back to that kind of the instant gratification and low threshold for getting into them, Like you said, you can stay in bed, you can play, and you start getting immediate gratification.
Yeah. So
probably similar to people who spend too much time on their cell phones. Like you're always looking for some kind of reward, whether it be a new message or something on social media or otherwise.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean, social media and stuff, it does use this mechanic. But when parents are like, I want you to tell me how to stop them using social media, and I'm like, I'm actually working specifically with games here. I will not stop them, but help them control. Games are their own culture, and any gamer knows that, right? It's this whole other world that you can be a part of. Social media and a lot of internet stuff, that's our lives that we just stuff online. So they're cousins, like social media and phones and the dopamine stuff open in there. They're cousins, but they're not they're not the same.
Cool. No, that's helpful. Thank you.
That's the way I look at it anyway.
Okay.
So where was I going? Yeah. So
You just mentioned how video games are unnatural and they provide so much dopamine.
yeah, I mean, it sounds so harsh, unnatural. I mean, they're unnaturally motivating. They motivate you more than real life would probably motivate you, because it's all about that instant thing. It's about desire. It's about, and I guess here's how I put it. You can feel a lot of fulfillment by doing stuff in real life. Like, I don't know, let's say you haven't seen a friend for 3 months and you catch up for a coffee and lunch. Mm-hmm. At the end of that catch up, it's not that you're there and saying, I don't feel satisfied. Come right back. Let's do this again right now. I need more. I feel good. I'm all topped up. It was great to see you. Oh, that feels awesome. That's not really necessarily a dopamine thing.
Maybe it's like having if you want some dessert, you have some healthy fruit as opposed to a load of Oreos and M&Ms. Just kind of a different kind of boost.
Sort
maybe.
of. I think the best way I would put it is, this gives you contentment where you don't need more. Whereas video games, it's very difficult to decide when it's enough. And that's the problem, right? It's self-control. And so if you learn how to control yourself a bit better, or if you're getting your needs met better in real life, then gaming takes the spot where it belongs. It's the icing on the cake. It's certainly a value add, right? Like, if I didn't have video games, there'd be this little box of awesome good times and pleasure and stuff that I wouldn't have access to. I love video games, but I've played too much before, and I know the difference. I mean, 40 years of age and over 25 years of experience. I've been in and out of playing too much before. I know what it's like. And if it's the only world you live in, you don't necessarily notice, right? It's just in the background. But do it long enough and get some perspective, and then you're like, oh, okay, it wasn't actually even that much fun when I was playing too much. And that's kind of some of the stuff I'd like to talk about, because like I said, like it shows that the more you play, the more you want to. You don't feel full up like you would after that catch up with somebody over coffee. You feel like you need more. I mean, there might be some cases, but I'll give you an example. PUBG, man, that's a painful game. And so you work really hard. You try to get a few kills. You try to make it. I like playing solos in first person, and Oceania is a pretty sweaty place to play. Everyone's pretty good at the medium level, and even when I got to the point where I played for however many hours, however many attempts, not to just get top 10, but actually get a win, I'm not even satisfied, like, wow, that was awesome, cheering, let's go, or anything like that. I'm actually just like, God, that took so long to actually get something. And it wasn't even that satisfying, because I wanted to go again and feel it again.
Right.
Because you spend so much time grinding for a win every now and then. Some people win a lot, but most of us don't. Most of us are trying to win. So even when you get the carrot that you've been chasing, it's not always enough, is my point. And it could be a little bit simpler than that. Maybe you're just playing Call of Duty. You got 10-minute map rotations or something, and you just try to be top of the kill feed or something like that. And you just like, oh yeah, I performed well this game. I'm on a hot streak. I should keep playing. Or I don't want to lose, so I don't want to end my night on a loss. And people just find all these reasons to keep playing because they're not satisfied enough yet. That's kind of my. And that's when things get a little bit, I don't know about dangerous, but bad habits can form easily. And then when it comes to actual performance, if things feel less rewarding, I find that, especially in battle royales, and I have a love-hate relationship with them, because I would prefer to play arena shooters, but they all die an early death because everyone's playing battle royales. You know what I'm saying? Like Titanfall 2 and Quake, like these amazing games that don't have a player base, because everyone's playing Fortnite and PUBG and Apex now.
Right.
So the more you play, the less rewarding it sort of feels. You're chasing that reward, and then you take more risks, right? I start playing like an idiot if I play too long. And then, of course, in a battle royale, especially like Apex, you're going to get 3-on-1s or something if you go rushing into a group, and you start to make more mistakes, and then you have even less satisfaction. You get frustrated. If you get frustrated, that's where that whole aggression argument comes out. It's not really violence. It's the frustration.
Right.
So I guess from the healthy thing in terms of your well-being and for performance and everything, this is my analogy for you. It's called redlining.
Okay.
So I mean, the analogy, of course, comes from the engine in a car, and redlining is when your revs get too high, and that's RPMs is your revolutions per minute. So instead of revolutions per minute, these are rewards per minute now. All right, and you get higher RPMs from playing exciting games, and overplaying is like redlining. And so what ends up happening, this is when you overplay, your dopamine receptors respond and adapt. And so that's like the dopamine shoots across from one brain cell to the other, across the gap, the synapse. And if you keep doing it, it adapts by removing receptors, right? So if it removes receptors, you can still feel, well, hopefully, just as satisfied, but it takes you longer. Right. And that's you end up getting this numbed pleasure response, which is why, games, you lose interest in games or you keep playing past the point of fun. And I'm just looking at my quote here. But mom, there's nothing else to do. That's kind of what happens with it. So like that's if I say that to parents, they all put their hand up because they all say that.
Well, and we can give some straight talk to people as well. Like the whole idea that there's nothing else to do is lazy. That's a lazy response. There's always something else you can do. Maybe maybe it's hot outside and it's restricted. Maybe it takes more work to do something else. But to your point earlier, for people who are just used to gaming all the time, you think, well, this is how I get my needs met and my rewards. And they're not realizing, again, and I think of it can become maybe like snack food, which has its place, but there's a real feast to be had in life to have those needs met that are really complementary, but when you get too skewed on one side of it, you can really miss out on that. So I think it's worth saying that, even though I don't want to.
No, you're right.
Don't want to beat anyone down listening, but that whether you're saying that to your mom or saying that to your roommate or yourself, the answer is this is not true.
But it's you're not beating anybody down by saying that, because the reason why people are saying there's nothing else to do to their moms is because their dopamine receptors aren't just desensitizing for one game they're playing. They're desensitizing. So regular life is harder. It's harder to feel satisfaction. So they need the most intense thing they can find, right? And so gaming is like almost zero effort to jump in and start flooding your dopamine receptors and feeling that reward. But it's playing the short game, right? It's instant gratification. It's not delaying your gratification. The long game is stuff that you dedicate yourself to and see yourself grow and feel fulfilled at the end of it,
And so you're saying that even like excessive gaming to the point where your dopamine receptors get desensitized, that transfers over. So even in other life, it's harder to find satisfaction as well. Interesting.
That's right. So somebody, let's say gaming versus depression. Research that I've seen, gaming can't cause depression. But if you've already got depression, you can make it worse, because now you can't find that satisfaction in real life where, we're naturally supposed to find it. Do you know what I mean? So right. But not just gaming, like excessive playing can make it worse. So if you're using gaming as a coping tool, it's not the best coping tool, not in big amounts anyway. Like if you just need a break or a distraction, sure, but if you're playing every single day and you're playing for hours and hours and hours, it's not going to give you what you think it is kind of what the message is here. So you desensitize. Oh, sorry, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, and tell me, and if I'm getting ahead of where you're at, just cut me off and we'll come back to it. But because this raises two questions for me. Like one, just the gamer who is very active and wants to become more competitive, and maybe they're realizing, I mean, again, with the things you're talking about, there's a lot here and it's super great, but obviously, really goes beyond a 45-minute interview.
Yeah, it does.
And so they're probably thinking, man, like, I'm not really sure I'm getting all this and how it relates to me, but I know there's something here and I want more. I'd love to talk about that briefly, but then also for the people who say, yeah, you're saying all that, but I want to be an esports professional or highly competitive. What's my alternative? I've got to stay in the game and keep going. I'd love for you to speak, because I'm imagining people really wanting some direction with those two things.
So everybody who's listening, thanks for your patience. The context is really actually pretty important, I think, to understand yourself a bit more. We're actually getting into it right now, though. So
great.
the timing's
no, and you've been doing great. That wasn't a critique.
No, that's cool. So here's the thing, right? So for most people, your concentration starts to fade. And I picked somewhere between 2 and 3 hours for a reasonable, like you've got school or you've got a job or whatever. You've already spent some of that mental energy on those things. Now, the thing is, if your concentration fades, you're not going to be able to perform. One of the biggest things that contributes to performance is rest. And so if you're constantly driving and driving and driving, you're not getting enough rest. If you don't get enough sleep, like literally what happens, and this is a great, I don't know if it's a TED talk. I saw something awesome about this though. Like when you sleep, I think it's your cerebral spinal fluid comes through and flushes over your brain and removes all the waste because there's no lymphatic system. There's no way to remove waste in your brain the same way it is removed in the rest of your body. And so if you don't get enough sleep, you don't actually get rid of the waste. So if you're thinking foggy, like you're almost accurate, like it's foggy because there's stuff in there that doesn't belong there. So like rest is really important for performance. And so obviously practice is as well. So where does that line get blurry? And it's honestly, there's still a question mark on this, right? I still don't know. I'm asking esports coaches, I'm asking people who are interested in the performance side and the healthier performance side of training for pro teams, which we can talk about in a minute. But the thing is, if you can't concentrate, you can't perform, then you're going to feel incompetent. And so with redlining, competence is a core motivator, right? So if you feel incompetent and you expect that you're going to perform and you're not, you can get frustrated. And this is where the rage comes in. This is keyboard bashing and physical aggression that come from that as well. But just more importantly, if you're frustrated and you're raging at all, you're not going to perform better. In fact, there's an interesting study for League of Legends players, or I don't know if it was a study, but a document that I saw that, as soon as they started to go on tilt, they lost the next few games. You just can't bring your A game when you're pissed off. So you got to do everything you can to try and get your clarity of thinking and your well-being and stuff in check, so that you can bring the best you can bring. And then the more time you spend chasing those rewards, because you desensitize, you end up playing even when it's not fun. So that's also something that'll make you take more risks. So you got to be really, really focused. Now, if you're a pro, it's your job, right? So you're not just motivated by being entertained anymore. So I think a lot of this stuff changes, but a lot of the stuff still stays the same. And the other 2 points here are more for people that aren't necessarily interested in performance. But the main thing is that you can, your in real life engagement starts to suffer, but also your enjoyment of your games. You know what I mean? From redlining, from playing too much, not from playing. Right, playing's great.
Right.
When you get over that line. So I guess we can go through this, or we can just chat. But like at the moment, and I did have a chat with a League of Legends pro team coach. I just won't mention, just in case. But he basically said that at this stage, they got to sacrifice everything, like everything. Wow. School, time, social life. I've heard anecdotally, not from the coach, that it's frowned upon to get a girlfriend or something like that. Like it's just because it'll take away from the time, because the attitude seems to be, if you're not practicing 12 to 15 hours a day, that somebody else is practicing that much, or the 16th hour, and that grind is what's going to get them ahead of you. That's the mentality.
Right.
What we're all interested in is that true? I think. Right. And so I think it's great that the industry is starting to address this. Like burning out of a career at 20 years old, that's not sustainable and not something to aspire to.
Well, and the thing that you've mentioned in different areas as well already is the fact that, there's lots of areas of life in every area of life where there's some level of competition. There's always going to be people that are going to try to redline beyond as far as they possibly can to get ahead, and every time it backfires. You may have success in the short term, but eventually the longer term cost is just too great. So I'm glad you're talking about this.
And what else? The coach said if you could play soccer 11 hours a day to get an edge on the competition and not break, wouldn't you do it? Right? So I understand the logic behind where the industry is at, but there's also never been a pathway, right? There's never been a solid pathway on how to get there. Right? It's always been rise the ranks, get scouted, I guess. This is my interpretation. So if I'm wrong, I'm happy to hear it, because like I said, I've only got some small ties to the industry, but it's you have to get noticed out of a pool of millions of players sometimes, right? So it seems like it's a pretty difficult thing to do. And so the logical thing to do is to play the crap out of the game.
Right.
So
Right.
that's hard to do. But a lot of gamers that are getting to this level don't have that experience necessarily. Some do, but not necessarily in training properly for high performance traditional sports, right?
Right.
So yeah, so we talked about that. I'm going to move on from that over there. So how much time? This is the main question, right? How much play time is actually needed for optimal performance without overtraining? And it was one of the more interesting things that I guess we need to recognize is most people know this, but you don't get tired playing video games. You get mental fatigue, which is hard to notice. But sports, like there's a clear point of time where you're like, yeah, I got to call it quits now, right? I can't move anymore, or I don't want to move anymore.
Right.
It's too hard. And so peak concentration is really the currency here, I think, for best performance. And it might be worth also recognizing that building a skill can be separate from peak performance. So like you can do hours on an aim trainer or in game if it's an FPS game like CSGO or something or Apex and trying to get the best aim you can get. And yeah, if you don't aim enough, you're probably not going to have that muscle memory you need. But I know myself now, I'm not trying to be a pro and I'm past whatever, age that they would recommend for best reaction time and all that. So I'll take that aside for a second. It's when I take a break and come back that my game sense and my aim is better.
Mm-hmm.
Like recently, I mean, Apex is my game at the moment. I don't get a lot of time to play. It's all at night when my kids are to sleep and my wife too. And it's like, what was I going to say? So yeah, so my video card blew up my power supply.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I had to take 2 weeks off. The Gigabyte actually repaired my card, which is great. Sent it back, 2 weeks off, which is longer than I'd recommend for a break. But after even just a little bit of a warm up, I got a bunch of wins in close succession and high kill games and stuff. And then, I kept playing. I was actually not playing. I was playing every day or almost every day, like 6 or 5 days a week instead of what I normally recommend, which is around 4, depending on how you're going to structure your time and what you're doing. But and then it got to the point that I was tired because I've got a small child. I'm not getting a lot of sleep right now,
Right.
and that impacted my performance massively. So after I just got my computer back and I'm playing and I'm enjoying it, and then even by the end of that first week, performance started going down. That's just one example. It's a recent one, but I see this happen all the time where it's easy to develop bad habits or whatever by playing when you don't have a clear purpose of what you're trying to do and you're not in peak performance. Because then you're training in a state of deficit, right?
Right.
So balancing that is super important. And yeah, so mental performance plays a huge part. I'm interested in what can be safer. And so that question you asked before about a pathway to becoming a pro that's safer.
Right. Right.
I'm still defining how this relationship works, but there's a high school esports league in Australia right now that I've been sort of working with, and I mean they're not trying to necessarily this is the gateway into becoming a pro, right? This is competitive play. It's organized. Treat this as maybe it's an external thing, but it's just school teams. So treat this like you would treat school versus school basketball or rugby, right? And
Right.
so it's an organized league, and there's a bunch of schools and a bunch of teams playing, and there's a teacher that comes in and helps them organize things. They're probably not knowledgeable enough to coach in most cases, but they at least help them organize. And even these guys aren't necessarily practicing together that much or organizing their training time that's purposeful. And I think that there's education that can be given on how to use their time efficiently and obviously still do well in school, because honestly, if it's a school team and they're not performing in school, they're not going to play on that school team, right? So I think it's a really good opportunity with Meta or other I know there's high school esports leagues in the US as well, to build the new culture from that level, from the ground up, right? So it's like, how do we train? How do we practice to be the most efficient with our time? And then when you become a pro, obviously, you don't have school to balance. You're going to be upping that gaming time, and that's cool. But then we're going to have to talk about things that keep you in balance there, like top professional athletes or CEOs or whatever, they use concentration exercises like meditation, different kinds of meditation to clear their thinking, to be on top of things, to get out of a funk or whatever it is, so that they can get into flow states and have pure performance. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and one thing that I'm thinking about with this too is like the safe pathway to becoming pro. I really appreciate what you kind of, again, the context you've given as far as like understanding your motivations and what you're trying to do and what needs you're trying to meet. Because one question is, well, why do you want to go pro? I mean, you said about why do you want to be gaming and what needs are you trying to meet through your gaming, but why do you want to go pro? And that could be asked for any athlete. There's a lot of athletes they want to go pro because, hey, who wouldn't love to get paid to play the game that you want to play? Of course, any professional would know that, once you're at the professional level, it's way more than playing a game at that point. It's very, there's a lot of work involved.
So different.
But also just realizing, well, why do you want to do that? Because any traditional sports athlete and probably most esports athletes, like you mentioned, you're 40, which isn't that old. And like, people consider you past your prime, so like, it's like one of those things like understanding, unless you have a broader context for having your needs met in life, like going pro may just be a bigger escape for you. And you're just delaying those problems and intensifying those problems. And one of the best things you may be able to do to even help you go pro is have that healthy game awareness that you're describing as far as what needs you having met, how are you meeting them, and gaming in a healthy way like that. I love the picture you're painting here, and I think it's really, really valuable.
It's really part of a bigger picture. Like any proper mental health, if you went to see a psychologist and all you do is listen to what they say and you didn't do anything, then like it's not going to work. Right? They're not here they don't press a button and fix you. They help you help yourself, right? And helping yourself always comes from being aware of your own thinking, being aware of your own emotions as they sort of happen. It's like your emotional intelligence, right? Mm-hmm. And if you can control your thinking and you get more of like a positive bias in the way you approach things as opposed to like a bit of a natural negative bias that humans have, you can be more in control of your own moods. In most cases, right? Sometimes it's a bit deeper than that. We gotta deeper, but like that knowing more about yourself and the way you think is essential to not just your own well-being, but to that performance as well. So like, I've struggled to come up with an example now because I don't play games competitively anymore. I did play a little bit, when people just made leagues. I played in the Cyber Athlete League back in the 2002, playing Counter-Strike 6, thinking I was big shot. Obviously, it was nothing close to esports the way it is now. But it was organized play, right? And so if I had known back then a little more about this kind of stuff, I think I would have probably still wanted to play and then structured things a bit more. Like we had practices for our teams and we had scrims and we had league games. And that's all good, but it's like, how would I structure the other time? So I'll give you an example. I had a chat with the coach and some other people involved with pros, and I've read some few things as well. And it seems like the regular workday stuff seems quite reasonable to me. So maybe there's 4 to 6 hours of scrims, right? Then there's they might go to the gym as a team for lunch and after lunch or something like that, and then they might do video review and strategize. That's just say that's like a typical day or something.
Yeah, that sounds like sports back when I was playing traditional sports. I remember in high school we would basically start football practice essentially around 1 PM and we'd be done around 7. But we're not on the field that entire time. There's like you're in the gym, you're watching film, you're doing drills and all that kind of stuff.
And so if you're doing that stuff, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours a day, like there's a balance there, especially if you're doing the proper nutrition and maybe some mental training as well in there. And that's a work day, right? Well, then you can't really argue that it's not a good idea. Most of us are in front of a screen for 8 hours a day or more when we're doing what other jobs we're doing. And there's a lot of teamwork involved. There seems to be some balance. It's more about what happens after. There's an expectation to keep improving on your own for like 5 hours. And so that's how they get to the 12-hour days.
Right.
And that's where the worry is for me. So
well, and I guess that's where and this is usually needs to involve other people because other people are going to see your blind spots and be able to give perspective. But that's where I guess for each individual gamer, again, not to use your tagline too much, but needing to be game aware and realizing, knowing yourself and realizing, hey, you know what? I think I'm getting to that red line spot and I'm going to back off because, and either right now I don't want to, but I know that weeks from now, I mean, maybe even later today, but weeks, months down the road, I'm going to be a better gamer because of it. And these other people are going to be burning out and you're still going to be healthy and playing at a higher level. And it's that counterintuitive dynamic that, again, it takes maturity and takes responsibility to make those choices. But so any of our young gamers listening, there's all the stuff you don't want to hear, but I'm telling you, it's going to make a difference over time in terms of you being healthier in life, healthier in gamer, and performing at higher levels.
And let's say you are a pro and maybe you do need to practice a little extra after your day, right? Or maybe you need to recognize, actually, I'm destroyed. I'm a little bit sick right now. I'm tired. I'm this, I'm that. It's better for me to go and relax and actually have some rest and some downtime to reset things so that I can come back ready to go,
Right.
And not just burning the candle at both ends the whole time.
And giving yourself the permission to do that and realizing this isn't quitting, it isn't failure, it's actually setting yourself up for higher performance and more success. It's super counterintuitive, but like I know I've given this illustration in other sessions before, but I remember back in college we were hiking the Grand Canyon here in the U.S., and I remember at some point there was a bulletin board saying basically, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but every hour stop for about 7 minutes and prop your legs up and rest, even if you're not tired. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to do that, But the thing is, the whole point is, it doesn't make sense in the short term, but you will last longer, you will remain stronger and better over the long term than everyone else when you take those micro rests throughout. And it's a similar dynamic here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're supposed to drink when you're not thirsty. If you're thirsty, you're already like 2 or 3% dehydrated and it has an effect on you. So that's a very good point. I'm just going to knock out of this for a sec. Right. And so, I mean, I just think we're at an interesting place, aren't we? Where this industry is starting to explode more than ever.
Right.
And we just got to make sure that it's sustainable, because you've got people that are scared of esports. So let's just put this in place right now. I really think it's important to come from that grassroots of the building from the ground up with the kids who want to compete in like a high school team or something like that, and structured play where you're actually social. You got other people around you, not just on the mic all the time. It's more of a quality experience. It's more enjoyable. You'll learn more. You'll play better probably. There's a lot there, and plus it's actually closer to what happens when they play on stage, right? But so building, I've lost my train of thought. This happens when you're a dad. So I lost it, Brian.
It's all right. It's all right.
Yeah.
Were you talking about like just gamers wanting to play more competitively on the high school level and otherwise, and just some of the, again, how all this kind of comes together, some of the tensions there? Because I mean, because I think at this point, I mean, I really appreciate the context you've given us in terms of the importance of being more game aware, understanding yourself, what needs you're having met, what needs you have, how you're having them met through gaming. A little bit on how to meet those beyond gaming, but obviously that's way more than a 45-minute session.
Yeah, for sure.
But just that awareness is significant. And then also, if you want to become more competitive, even move toward more professional play, here's some things to have in mind while you're doing that. I mean, that's kind of the big context here.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure whatever bow you want to tie on all that would be fantastic, but I feel like you've really laid a great foundation so far.
Well, I reckon I remember now. The bow is, I think the esports industry needs a very good relationship with parents. And because, I mean, when you get brought onto a team, you're pretty young, right? And parents are still involved in what's going on. There might be some seriously good talent out there that never made it because their parents said, you can't, you're not allowed, whatever the case is.
Right.
Parents don't understand video games, right? And if the culture shifts to a point where people don't say esports equals addiction because they think that time spent playing is the metric of an addiction, right? Because a lot of people think it's all about time, and it's not. I mean, you can still have just from too much time spent gaming. You can still have some serious, opportunity costs and detrimental effects from that, for sure. Desensitization and all sorts of stuff. It's not good for you. Going back to that first study that we talked about, where past 3 hours a day. So it basically tells you if you're playing every single day, which I wouldn't recommend, and you're past, like 21 hours a week, just pay attention. Like maybe you won't notice, but that is where in the studies they've done, they've noticed that drop in well-being,
Right.
which is easily fixed by not playing every day. Like have your 3 hour sessions, but like dial back how many days you can, or take a few days off. But having that relationship with the parents and having them understand, and building that safer pathway means that these are the people that you're fighting against. In a way, at least all the parents that come through my program, they're scared they're like, oh, I don't understand esports. That's one side. But just because it's a competitive way and possibly a professional way to make money from video games and all that stuff, that doesn't calm their fears.
Right.
Because they're worried about the well-being of their kid. And it's
Right.
like, what do you mean they're playing 15 hours a day? No way. And so it's just interesting where we're at right now. And so I'm really curious, is it possible? Because I don't know. We know that for people who aren't pros, we know that definitely you shouldn't be overplaying where it's to the detriment of your real life. But what if you play 14 hours, or if you play 10 hours instead of 14 hours, you actually start losing because of it? Do you know what I mean? Like what if, you're doing all these amazing things, and what if that's the truth? I don't know. I haven't researched or conducted anything, not that I would, but those kinds of things need to be done for the sake of understanding, is esports like a sustainable thing? But then also we need to dive deep. Like there's people like G Science, for example. I think his name's Ryan Scollin. I had a chat with him, and they've got some really interesting stuff on how to train smarter and very individualized. And it's like, how do you get these optimal results the smart way? And maybe you can cut the gaming time in, I don't know, half, let's say. Maybe not half, but whatever, less, so that there's more balance and more rest and more things like that. Like there are people out there that are doing this stuff in more depth. Like I'm more about like for people that aren't pros, or maybe who are just trying to be competitive and enjoy their games, which
Right.
is the majority of us,
Right.
But like that stuff needs to be explored in depth, because otherwise the culture is not going to shift. The culture is going to be, because like if you say this is what's good for your players, right? You need to make them, I don't know, let's say it's like cut it off at 10 hours or cut it off 8 hours, and you're not allowed to do that. If there was a law or a rule and a penalty and stuff, people would just do it anyway.
Right.
Because they think it's going to make them win, because you have to win to make the money, or whatever the case. So we've got to do a deep dive to find out how do we hit that optimal performance without overdoing it.
No, I think that's great. And I think, and again, with all this, realizing again, what are the deeper values and things that are driving you? And that just goes so far as shaping all these things and your perspectives, and kind of maintaining a healthy place. Because there's going to be a little bit of, I'm sure there's going to be a difference for everyone. Some people gaming this much is good and this much is okay and this much is too much. And it's going to vary from person to person. But
that's right.
Bottom line is, Andrew, you've given us a lot of really great stuff to think about today, and really appreciate that. Thanks for all you're doing at GameAware and helping out all the gamers and parents and adults just be healthier gamers and perform more optimally, and really appreciate what you're doing and being a part of the summit.
Thanks for having me, Brian.